Winter nearly took everything from him that night. One man, one storm, and two dogs that refused to die. If you had walked past them in the falling snow, would you have stopped? Would you have followed a dog that kept bowing to you like its life depended on it? Officer Rowan Hale did not know that the next few minutes would change his entire world. He did not know that love was waiting for him in the shape of two freezing puppies. He did not know that the winter would choose him for a miracle. This is not just a rescue story. It is a story about loyalty, hope, and the quiet power of not giving up. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from and leave your city in the comments. Because tonight this story belongs to every heart that still believes in second chances. Snow had been falling over Ashford Ridge, Montana since before dawn, the kind of patient, relentless winter that muffles the town until even grief sounds softer beneath it. The mountains crouched like old witnesses around the valley, streetlights glowing amber against the pale storm. Storefront windows fogged with the breath of early risers, and the wind moving through the narrow main street with a low, steady moan that seemed to belong to the town itself, as if Ashford Ridge were exhaling another difficult winter. Officer Rowan Hale, 38, stood at the corner outside Baker and Finch Cafe. Boots dusted white, navy winter coat pulled tight. The faint scar above his right eyebrow catching the light when he turned. A reminder of a highway crash 6 years earlier that had killed his partner and left Rowan with a cautious, inward way of living ever since. The kind of man who spoke softly, moved deliberately, and carried his past like a carefully folded map. He never opened unless he had to, his hair dark and short, his eyes gray and watchful, his shoulders broad but permanently weighted by the work, the loss, the years of being the first to arrive when something had gone wrong, his radio crackling weakly at his chest while he finished logging the overnight power outage near the farmer's market, his breath fogging as he tucked the notebook into his coat. Already thinking about the long drive home to the empty house at the edge of town where the furnace groaned louder than conversation, and the walls still smelled faintly of the pine cleaner his late wife Elena used to favor, when something moved at the edge of his vision and made him stop. The animal stood just beyond the cafe's light, half hidden by drifting snow, a German shepherd puppy, perhaps 8 months old, black and gray coat crusted with ice, ribs faintly visible when the wind pressed the fur flat, ears standing but trembling, paws raw and pink at the edges, the dog's posture tense yet strangely composed, as if holding together by will alone. And when Rowan shifted his weight, the dog took a single step forward and then did something that caused Rowan's chest to tighten in a way he did not expect. It lowered its front legs, bent its elbows, and pressed its chest close to the snow, head dipping down, eyes never leaving Rowan's face. Not a playful bow the way puppies sometimes offer, but slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The motion repeated once more, deeper this time, breath quick, tail stiff with some mixture of fear and hope. Rowan glancing around as two bundled townspeople passed. Martha Klein, the florist, short and round with red mittens and a habit of humming hymns when she walked, gave the dog a sad look and then kept going. And Ben Carter, a lanky high school teacher with wire glasses and a habit of avoiding complications, pulled his scarf higher and turned his eyes away. And suddenly, it was just Rowan and the dog in the falling snow. Rowan lowering his gloved hand slightly, not reaching, only acknowledging, speaking quietly as if the storm itself might be listening. "Hey there, buddy." And the dog bowed again, the motion unsteady now. A tiny shiver passing through its shoulders. Rowan touching his radio, calling into dispatch to ask about reports of a stray, the line answering with static, the storm choking the signal, his jaw tightening, his instincts rising the way they always did when something vulnerable stood in front of him and no one else seemed to notice. The dog turning then, stepping 3 paces away, pausing, looking back, and bowing once more as if repeating a question that could not be spoken. Rowan hesitating, thinking of policy, of procedure, of the shift that technically ended 10 minutes ago, thinking of the warmth of his house and the ache in his knees, and then thinking of nothing at all as he followed. They moved toward the darker end of Main Street where the market stalls were shuttered for winter, snow piled in crooked drifts against the wooden frames, the smell of old apples and frozen fish lingering in the cold air, the dog glancing back every few steps, bowing when Rowan slowed, urging him onward, until they slipped between 2 long storage buildings, where the wind thinned and the light fell away, and there, against a wet brick wall dusted with ice, lay another German shepherd. Smaller, perhaps 6 months old, pale gold fur matted and darkened by meltwater, body curled tightly. Breath so shallow Rowan had to kneel to see it move at all. The dog's eyes half closed, ribs pressing sharply beneath the skin, a faint whimper escaping when Rowan shifted the snow near its face. The first dog rushing to the smaller one, nudging it gently with its nose, then lifting its head to Rowan and bowing again. But this time the gesture was no longer directed at him. It was aimed at the space between life and whatever waited beyond. Rowan swallowing, the sound loud in the quiet, unbuttoning his coat and wrapping it around the weaker dog, feeling the unnatural chill of its body through the fabric. His hands steady, only because training demanded they be. His mind already moving through options, radio useless, the animal clinic on the other side of town, the roads growing worse by the minute, and yet the only real thought that remained was simple and unavoidable. I am here now. He stood, lifting the small body carefully against his chest, the dog's heart fluttering weakly beneath his palm, the first dog pressing close to his leg, tail low, ears back. And when Rowan started toward the street, the dog ran ahead, stopped, bowed, and then trotted on, leading the way as if it knew exactly where Hope was supposed to go. Rowan slipping once on the ice, catching himself, the smaller dog stirring slightly, a sound so thin it felt like it might disappear between one heartbeat and the next. Rowan murmuring words he did not remember choosing. Words meant for Elena once upon a time when storms were different. The first dog circling him now, anxious, urgent, and when Rowan reached the road, he flagged down a passing pickup. The driver, Harold Pike, broad-shouldered, gray-bearded, cautious, as all mountain men were, leaning out to listen, his eyes widening when he saw the limp form in Rowan's arms, nodding once, without question, and throwing open the passenger door. The interior warm with coffee and gasoline, the first dog leaping inside and turning immediately to watch Rowan as he settled the weaker dog onto the seat, the truck pulling away into the storm, the town sliding past in white and amber streaks, Rowan's reflection in the window looking older than he felt, his breath counting the seconds between the smaller dog's shallow inhales, the larger dog, which Rowan would later name Coda, watching him with eyes too bright, too aware, lowering its front legs again in that strange bow even as the truck sped on, as if reminding him that whatever promise had been made between them had not yet been fulfilled. And when the clinic's lights finally appeared through the snow, Rowan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, knowing without any doubt that this night, this storm, this silent plea on a winter street had already changed the shape of everything that would come after. The veterinary clinic on Ridgeway Avenue glowed like a fragile island of warmth in the middle of the storm, its windows fogged from the breath of heaters fighting the Montana winter, the blue neon sign humming softly above the door while snow stacked against the curb in quiet, patient walls. Rowan Hale stepped out of Harold Pike's truck with the smaller dog cradled tightly in his arms, his coat still wrapped around the trembling body, his boots crunching on ice, the cold clawing at his knuckles despite the heat of the animal pressed to his chest. Harold, thick-set and weathered, wearing a wool cap stained with years of diesel and mountain wind, nodded once more before driving off, the truck's red tail lights swallowed by snow. Rowan did not watch it go. His eyes were locked on the glass door ahead, on the promise of light behind it. The larger German shepherd bounded from the truck bed, skidding slightly, then stopping abruptly in front of Rowan. Its ears were slicked back, eyes shining too brightly, its chest rising and falling fast. And once again, right there on the frozen sidewalk, the dog lowered itself into that strange bow. Not playful, not submissive, but deliberate, aching with urgency, as if carving its plea directly into the night. Rowan swallowed and whispered, "I'm here. I've got him." The dog's tail twitched, stiff, and it turned, pushing its nose against the clinic door. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic and old paper, the kind of clean that made fear feel louder. A young receptionist named Lily Park, early 20s, slim, black hair pulled into a loose knot, dark circles under her eyes from too many night shifts and too many emergencies, looked up from her desk and froze when she saw the limp bundle in Rowan's arms. "Oh, God," she whispered, already moving. She pushed open the treatment door, calling for the on-call vet. The larger dog followed, nails clicking on tile, then stopped short at the doorway when Lily raised a gentle hand. "Not inside yet, okay?" she said softly, her voice practiced with frightened animals. The dog hesitated, eyes darting between Rowan and the door, then lowered into that bow again, pressing its chest to the floor as if trying to anchor itself to hope. Rowan knelt, resting the smaller dog carefully on the metal exam table. Its body was alarmingly light, the bones too close to the surface, its breath shallow and uneven, each rise of its chest an argument against the dark. The veterinarian, Dr. Evelyn Moore, in her late 40s, tall and lean, silver-streaked hair escaping from her cap, eyes sharp but kind in the way of someone who had held too many lives at the edge, moved in immediately, fingers skilled, voice calm. "Severe hypothermia, dehydration, starvation," she said, more to the room than to Rowan. "We need heat, fluids, oxygen, now." Rowan stepped back as technicians swarmed the table. He stood uselessly near the wall, hands hanging open, his heart pounding in a way he had not felt since the night of the crash that took Elena. He watched the smaller dog's chest, the way the skin barely moved under the towel they had wrapped around it. The oxygen mask fitted gently over its muzzle. Machines began to hum and beep. He pressed his knuckles to his mouth, the scar over his eyebrow tightening as he clenched his jaw. The larger dog, still unnamed, still only the messenger of this night, paced in the narrow hallway, then returned to the doorway and bowed again, its body trembling, eyes fixed on Rowan like he was the one holding the clock of the universe in his hands. Minutes stretched. Snow thickened against the windows. Lily approached Rowan with a clipboard. "We'll need your information," she said quietly. "And what are you to the dogs?" Rowan hesitated, the question cutting deeper than expected. He had been a stranger less than an hour ago. "I found them," he said. "I'm not leaving." Lily nodded, as if that answer was enough. He filled out the form with hands that shook despite his training. Rowan Hale, officer, Ashford Ridge Police Department, contact number, the pen scratching louder than it should have in the small room. The larger dog sat at his feet now, close enough that Rowan could feel its warmth through his pants, the animal's body rigid with tension, ears flicking at every sound behind the door. Rowan rested his palm lightly on its back. The dog did not move, but its breathing slowed, just a fraction. Dr. Moore finally emerged. "He's alive," she said. The words hit Rowan like a physical thing. "But he's critical. The next 72 hours are everything." Rowan nodded once. "I'll stay." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Good. He'll need that." Rowan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He looked down at the larger dog. "You hear that?" he whispered. The dog's tail gave one short, stiff flick. It stepped forward, bowed once more, then pressed its nose against Rowan's knee as if sealing a promise that had begun long before either of them knew the words. Hours passed. Night deepened. Rowan sat in the waiting room chair, coat draped over his lap, radio silent at his side, phone unread. He did not care. The larger dog never truly lay down. It paced, sat, stood, and bowed, over and over, its strange ritual marking time. Rowan began to understand that the motion was not random. It was the only language the dog had left for fear. He thought of Elena, of the way she used to whisper prayers before storms, not because she expected answers, but because hope had to go somewhere. Around 3 a.m, Dr. Moore let Rowan step inside for a moment. The smaller dog lay wrapped in blankets, tubes taped to its leg, chest rising and falling just enough. Rowan approached slowly, heart hammering. He reached out with one finger, barely touching the fur between its eyes. "Stay," he whispered, the word fragile and fierce at once. The larger dog watched from the doorway, chest low to the ground in that same bow, eyes never leaving its friend. Dawn crept in pale and thin through the clinic windows. Snow softened to flakes the size of feathers. Rowan had not slept. His thoughts drifted between past and present, between the highway crash and the frozen alley, between the life he had been carrying for years and the one now lying on a table, refusing to let go. At 7:30, Dr. Moore returned. "He's stable for now," she said. Rowan closed his eyes. "But this is only the beginning." He nodded. He knew. He always had. The larger dog finally allowed itself to sit. Its head dropped, resting against Rowan's knee. For the first time since they had met, the bowing stopped. The storm outside had begun to loosen its grip on the town. Snow fell quieter now, as if listening. Rowan looked down at the dog. "You saved him," he murmured. The dog did not answer, but its body leaned closer, the warmth steady, real. And in that small clinic, in that long winter night, Rowan understood the truth that would guide everything that followed. The dog had not bowed because it was weak. It had bowed because it was brave enough to ask the world for help when it could not do this alone. The snow had not truly stopped for 3 days. It only changed its mind about how fiercely it wished to fall. Sometimes it came down in thick white curtains, sometimes in thin, drifting whispers, but always it came, as if Ashford Ridge itself were being slowly erased and redrawn by winter's patient hand. Rowan Hale left the clinic just after dusk, his breath clouding in front of him, his shoulders heavier than they had ever felt, not from exhaustion alone, but from the quiet gravity of the promise he had made without ever saying the words. Behind him, through the glass, he could still see the smaller dog lying beneath blankets and wires, its chest lifting in shallow but stubborn rhythm, and beside the door sat the larger German shepherd, unmoving now, eyes following Rowan as if they were tethered by something deeper than sight. Dr. Moore had insisted Rowan go home, shower, eat something, sleep for at least a few hours before the next long vigil. Rowan nodded because nodding was easier than arguing. The dog had not followed him this time. It had chosen the door, the place between the living and the waiting. Ashford Ridge at night in winter was a town of hushed colors. Street lamps painted long gold rivers across the snow. Houses crouched beneath their roofs, smoke lifting from chimneys in thin gray prayers. Rowan's boots crunched along the sidewalk as he walked instead of driving, needing the cold in his lungs, needing to feel the world under his feet. He passed the frozen park where he and Elena once built a crooked snowman during their first year in town, laughed until their hands burned, and the memory rose uninvited, sharp and warm and aching. By the time he reached his house on the edge of town, the storm had begun to soften again, flakes drifting slow and wide, as if the sky itself were tired. Rowan slept for 3 hours. When he woke, the dark had returned, and with it the sound of the wind and the image of the smaller dog's fragile breathing. He showered, ate half a sandwich, and was back on the road before his coffee finished cooling. By the time he reached the clinic again, snow had stacked another inch against the doors. Inside, Lily gave him a tired smile and a paper cup of bad coffee. "He's still holding," she said. Rowan closed his eyes for a moment and nodded. The larger dog was exactly where he had left him, pressed against the treatment room door, ears flicking at every sound. Rowan knelt, the tile cold through his pants, and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's neck. "You're doing good," he whispered. The dog responded not with a bow this time, but with a slow, steady exhale. Hours passed. The world narrowed to the sound of machines, the quiet footsteps of technicians, the rhythm of waiting. Rowan dozed in the chair and woke to Dr. Moore's hand on his shoulder. "He's stable enough that we can move him off oxygen for a bit," she said. Rowan's chest loosened just enough to remind him it still existed. "But he's still dangerously weak." Rowan nodded. He stood and followed her inside. The smaller dog's eyes fluttered when Rowan spoke his name, the name that had not yet been chosen but was already forming somewhere in the space between them. Its paw twitched against the blanket. The larger dog was allowed inside now, stepping slowly, reverently, across the tile, as if entering sacred ground. It approached the table and did what it had done since the beginning. It bowed, deep and still, its chest brushing the floor, its eyes locked on the smaller dog's face. Rowan felt his throat tighten. He had seen grown men face death without a sound, but this silent ritual broke him in a way no siren ever had. That night, the smaller dog's condition faltered. Its breathing grew shallow again, the monitor ticking louder, each beep a hammer in Rowan's ears. Dr. Moore moved fast, technicians adjusting fluids, oxygen, heat. Rowan stood against the wall, fists clenched, heart pounding, while the larger dog paced, whined once, a small broken sound, then returned to the foot of the table and bowed again and again, as if the motion itself were holding the world together. Rowan whispered words he did not remember learning, words meant for snow and blood and whatever listened when everything else fell away. By morning, the crisis eased. Barely. Rowan had not left. He had not moved. When Dr. Moore finally stepped back, she exhaled slowly. "He's still with us." Rowan sank into the chair, the strength leaving his knees all at once. The larger dog came to him and, for the first time, pressed its head fully into his lap. The bowing stopped, for now. The second day brought a tiny miracle. The smaller dog swallowed a drop of water from a syringe. Rowan laughed and cried at the same time, the sound unfamiliar in his own ears. The larger dog's tail thumped once against the floor. the first sign of joy since the storm had found them. By the third day, the smaller dog's eyes opened fully. They were clouded with exhaustion, but they saw Rowan, they saw the other dog, and they did not close again. The storm outside began to weaken. The town emerged slowly from its white cocoon. Sunlight touched the windows of the clinic on the fourth morning, pale and unsure, like hope itself. Rowan stood beside the table as the smaller dog shifted, its body trembling with the effort of movement. The larger dog stepped forward, bowed one last time, then nudged its friend's shoulder gently with its nose, steadying it. The smaller dog's legs wobbled. It rose, just for a second, and then it collapsed into Rowan's arms. Rowan laughed, a sound that surprised everyone in the room. He held the trembling body against his chest, feeling the fragile heartbeat that had almost been lost. The larger dog barked once, sharp, bright, and spun in a small circle before bowing again, this time not in fear, but in triumph. Outside, the snow finally began to melt. Winter had not finished with Ashford Ridge, but it had loosened its grip enough for the town to breathe again. The streets were still wrapped in white, yet now the snow shone instead of threatening, as if the storm itself had grown tired of trying to break what refused to bend. Rowan Hale noticed the change the moment he stepped outside the clinic on the fifth morning, his breath no longer slicing painfully in his lungs, the sky no longer the color of old steel but something pale and patient, a promise half kept. He had not truly gone home since the night he carried the trembling body through the doors. He had slept in the waiting chair, washed his face in the clinic sink, eaten vending machine crackers and too much coffee, and somehow the days had stitched themselves into one long vigil. Inside, behind the treatment room glass, the smaller German shepherd lay wrapped in layered blankets, wires trailing from its thin leg, eyes half open now, aware, present. The larger dog, Coda, sat at the threshold like a carved statue. His once frantic bowing slowed into something steadier, something like watchfulness, though every time Rowan moved too far from the table, Coda's chest still dipped low in that familiar motion, as if reminding the world that the fight was not yet finished. Dr. Evelyn Moore met Rowan by the door with a clipboard pressed to her chest. Her hair was looser now, streaked with fatigue, the kind that comes from standing too long at the edge of other people's hope. "He's stable," she said, the word careful but honest. "Not strong, not safe, but no longer falling." Rowan nodded, feeling the weight of it settle into his bones. He followed her into the room, the smell of antiseptic and warm fur filling his senses. The smaller dog's eyes tracked him. There was something new in them, something fragile and fierce. Rowan knelt beside the table, resting his hand lightly on the blanket. "You're stubborn," he murmured. The dog's paw twitched, just barely, and Rowan's chest tightened with something dangerously close to joy. They began the slow work of the next days. Fluids, heat, gentle feeding, measured movements. Rowan learned the rhythm of the clinic, the soft routines of Lily's footsteps, the hum of the machines, the way Dr. Moore's voice changed when things went wrong and when they went right. Coda learned too. He followed Rowan everywhere, his body never far from the smaller dog's side, lying close enough to share warmth, eyes always open, always counting breaths. At night, when Rowan's eyes burned from exhaustion, Coda would stand, step into that low bow once, then return to his place, the ritual a quiet command. Stay awake. Stay here. Don't let the dark steal anything else. On the seventh day, the smaller dog lifted his head on his own. The movement was slow and uncertain, his muscles trembling as if they had forgotten their purpose. But it was real. Rowan's breath caught in his throat. Caught. "Easy," he whispered. Coda stepped closer, pressing his shoulder lightly against the other's side, a living brace. Dr. Moore watched from the doorway, arms crossed, her face softer than Rowan had ever seen it. "That's good," she said. "That's very good." Rowan nodded, unable to speak, his eyes stinging as he brushed the fur between the smaller dog's ears. The clinic windows glowed with afternoon light that day, the sun finally strong enough to turn the snow outside into a field of diamonds. Rowan took Coda for a short walk while the smaller dog slept, the leash unnecessary but comforting in his hand. Coda moved cautiously at first, his paws uncertain on the packed snow, then more confidently, his breath steaming in short white bursts. He stopped once in the middle of the sidewalk and looked up at Rowan, his eyes searching. Rowan crouched. "We're not leaving him," he said. Coda's tail flicked once. He bowed, slow and deep, then continued walking, satisfied. That night, the smaller dog's condition dipped again. Fever, shallow breaths. The machines grew louder. Dr. Moore moved with the same calm speed as always, but Rowan saw the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she chose her words. Rowan stood with his hands braced on the table, his heart hammering, while Coda paced and then dropped into his bow, holding it longer than ever before, his chest flat against the floor, his eyes burning holes into the space between life and whatever waited beyond. Rowan whispered again, words meant for the snow, for the dark, for Elena, for everything he had lost and everything he was terrified of losing now. By morning, the fever broke. The smaller dog slept, his breathing steadier. Rowan sank into the chair, the strength leaving him, Coda finally curling against his leg, his body heavy and warm and real. Dr. Moore placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder. "He's fighting," she said. Rowan nodded. He had known that from the moment he saw the dog's eyes open to the world again. 3 more days passed. On the 10th day, the smaller dog stood. It was not a clean, triumphant rise. His legs shook, his body tilted, his weight too much for bones that had nearly forgotten what it meant to carry life. Rowan moved instinctively, arms out, but Coda reached him first, nudging the smaller dog's side, steadying him, holding him upright for the single, impossible second it took for the world to change. The smaller dog swayed, then collapsed gently into Rowan's chest. Rowan laughed, the sound loud and broken and beautiful. Coda barked once, sharp and bright, then bowed again. This time, the motion not a plea, but a celebration. Dr. Moore smiled. Lily wiped her eyes. The clinic felt warmer than it had in days. By the end of the 2nd week, the smaller dog could take a few steps on his own. They were clumsy, uneven, each one an argument against gravity and memory, but they were steps. Rowan walked beside him, hands ready, heart in his throat, Coda pacing on the other side, their small family stitched together by fragile motion and shared breath. Rowan found himself speaking aloud, telling the dog about the town, about the house by the river where the snow drifted higher than the windows, about Elena and the way she used to laugh at his silence, about the long winter that had once nearly ended him too. On the 14th day, Dr. Moore called Rowan into her office. "He's strong enough to leave the critical ward," she said. Rowan sat slowly, the word leaving echoing in his chest. "He'll still need care, constant, gentle, but he doesn't belong to the machines anymore." Rowan nodded. "He belongs to us," he said before he could stop himself. Dr. Moore smiled faintly. "I think he already does." That afternoon, Rowan stood by the door of the treatment room as the smaller dog was lifted carefully onto a padded blanket near the window. Coda approached, nose touching his friend's ear, then bowed one last time, holding the pose as if marking the end of something old and the beginning of something new. The smaller dog's eyes fluttered open. They met Rowan's. For the first time, truly, without the fog of pain and fever between them. Outside, the snow had begun to drip from the eaves. Winter was still there, still watching. But life was winning. By the time the 15th morning arrived, Ashford Ridge no longer felt like the same town that had swallowed Rowan Hale beneath weeks of snow and silence. The streets still glistened white, but now the sunlight lingered longer on the windows, catching in the icicles along the eaves and turning them into small, fragile stars. The storm that had once ruled the valley had begun to retreat, not in defeat, but in surrender, as if even winter had finally accepted what was happening inside the veterinary clinic on Ridgeway Avenue. Rowan stood at the edge of the treatment room, hands tucked into the pockets of his coat, watching the smaller dog, the one who had nearly slipped out of the world without leaving a sound, attempt another cautious rise. His legs wobbled, the effort visible in the tight lines of his thin body, but his eyes were open now, alert, and burning with the kind of stubborn life Rowan recognized immediately. He had seen it in victims pulled from wreckage, in children who refused to cry after the ambulance doors closed, in himself after Elena's funeral. It was the look of something that refused to go quietly. Coda stood opposite Rowan, ears forward, every muscle coiled, his entire body a living brace for his fragile companion. When the smaller dog's front paws slid forward on the tile, Coda stepped closer, pressing his shoulder gently against the other's side. The motion was instinctive, precise, almost tender. The smaller dog swayed, then steadied. Rowan felt his breath stop in his chest. "Easy," Rowan whispered, even though the dog could not understand the word. He stepped closer, crouching slightly, arms open but not touching, letting the moment belong to the two animals who had already done more for each other than most humans ever would. The smaller dog stood. It was only for a heartbeat, then two, then three. Then his legs gave out and he folded forward into Rowan's chest. Rowan laughed. The sound burst from him before he could stop it, loud and raw and soaked with disbelief. His arms closed instinctively around the trembling body, feeling bone and fur and heat and life pressed against him. His eyes burned. His face hurt from smiling. Behind him, Coda barked, a short, sharp sound that startled Lily at the desk and made Dr. Moore turn from the doorway. Coda spun in a small, awkward circle, paws skidding, tail stiff. Then he dropped into that familiar bow. But this time the movement was different. It was slower, deeper, steadier. It no longer looked like fear. It looked like ceremony. Dr. Moore's lips parted in a quiet smile. Lily pressed her fingers to her mouth, eyes shining. "Would you look at that?" Dr. Moore murmured. He did it. Rowan set the smaller dog back onto the padded blanket by the window. The dog's chest heaved with effort, but his eyes never left Rowan's face. Coda approached, nose touching his friend's cheek, then bowed once more and settled beside him, their bodies pressed together like two halves of the same promise. The afternoon unfolded in a strange new light. For the first time since that night in the storm, no alarms rang. No machines screamed. The clinic hummed with ordinary sounds, paper rustling, phones ringing, the low murmur of voices, the faint clatter of dishes from the break room. Ordinary life returned, and Rowan realized how much he had missed it. Over the next few days, the smaller dog's strength returned in tiny victories. One step became two became three. He learned the strange geography of the clinic, the cold tile, the warm patch by the heater, the way the light moved across the wall in the afternoon. Coda never left his side. If Rowan moved too far away, Coda followed him with his eyes, then glanced back at his companion, as if counting heartbeats between the three of them. On the 18th day, snow melted from the roof of the clinic in slow silver streams. Rowan stood outside with Coda while the smaller dog rested, the air cool but no longer cruel. Coda's breath puffed white. He lifted his head, ears tilting toward the sound of dripping water, and for the first time since Rowan had met him, Coda's tail wagged. It was a small motion, uncertain, as if the dog himself did not quite trust it, but it was real. Rowan crouched. "You know what that means, don't you?" he said softly. Coda's tail wagged again. Inside, the smaller dog stirred. Rowan returned to his side, placing a shallow bowl of water near his nose. The dog sniffed, hesitated, then lowered his muzzle. He drank, only a few sips, but enough. Rowan's hands trembled as he set the bowl aside. Later that evening, Dr. Moore gathered them in the treatment room. "He's ready for the next step," she said. "He can leave the critical ward. He'll still need daily care, proper feeding, warmth, follow-up visits, but he doesn't belong to the machines anymore." Rowan swallowed. The words settled into him slowly, like snow turning to rain. "What about after?" he asked. Dr. Moore looked at him over her glasses. "After is up to you." Rowan looked down at the two dogs. Coda was watching him, eyes clear and steady. The smaller dog shifted closer, resting his head against Rowan's boot. Rowan had lived alone for so long he had forgotten the shape of belonging. He thought of his empty house, the quiet mornings, the ache that never fully left, and he knew, with a certainty that did not require permission. "He comes with me," Rowan said. Coda's tail thumped once. That night, Rowan sat on the floor beside the blanket, his back against the wall, both dogs pressed against him. Outside, the last of the storm clouds drifted across the moon. Snow fell in slow, harmless flakes, no longer a threat, but a witness. Rowan closed his eyes, feeling warmth on either side of him, and for the first time since Elena died, the silence did not feel like a wound, it felt like rest. Spring did not arrive in Ashford Ridge with fanfare. It did not crash through the valley or announce itself with sudden warmth. It came the way all good things came to this town, slowly, carefully, as if it had learned from winter not to promise too much at once. The snow still clung to the mountains, but the streets ran wet now instead of white. and the sky lingered longer each evening in soft gold. Rowan Hale noticed these changes as he stood outside the veterinary clinic on Ridgeway Avenue, the leash in his hand light but steady, his breath finally rising without pain in his chest. Behind him, the glass door opened and Dr. Evelyn Moore stepped out, her coat wrapped tightly, silver hair catching the light. "You're clear," she said. "Both of them." Rowan nodded, the words settling into him like a final stitch closing a wound that had been open for years. At his feet, the smaller German shepherd, thin still but standing, alert, alive, lifted his head. Coda stood beside him, larger now, steadier, his coat no longer crusted with ice but thick and bright under the spring sun. When Rowan knelt to clip the second leash, Coda did what he had done from the beginning. He lowered his chest to the ground and bowed, not from fear, not from desperation, but from gratitude. Rowan placed a hand on Coda's head. "We're going home," he said. The word home sounded different now. The drive out of town was quiet. The river along the highway had broken free of its ice, moving again, dark and shining. Snow retreated from the fields in crooked islands, grass pushing through in fragile green threads. Rowan drove with the window cracked, letting the air fill the cab with the scent of wet earth and pine. In the back seat, the smaller dog lay curled on a blanket, eyes half closed, breathing steady. Coda sat upright, watching the world slide past, ears forward, as if memorizing every mile of this new life. Rowan's house stood where the town thinned into trees, a modest wood-sided place with a stone chimney and a porch that creaked when the wind came down from the hills. He had not thought of it as lonely until now. He parked in the drive and opened the door. Coda leapt out first, then stopped, turned back, and bowed, as if asking permission for what came next. Rowan smiled. "Go on." They crossed the threshold together. Inside, the house smelled of old coffee and winter and the faint trace of pine cleaner that had never quite faded since Elena. Rowan knelt and spread a blanket near the fireplace. The smaller dog walked in on his own this time, shaky but determined. He circled once, then lowered himself onto the blanket with a long breath. Coda followed and lay beside him, their bodies pressed together as if they had never known another way to exist. Rowan stood in the doorway, watching. The silence of the house shifted. It was no longer empty. It was waiting. The first night was cautious. Rowan slept on the couch with one hand hanging over the edge, his fingers resting in Coda's fur. The smaller dog slept close, breathing steady and soft. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but the house held its warmth. When Rowan woke just before dawn, Coda was already awake, watching him, eyes calm. He did not bow this time. He simply stayed. Weeks unfolded. Strength returned slowly to the smaller dog's legs. Rowan took them on careful walks along the river road, the leash loose in his hand, the town greeting them with small nods and curious glances. Martha Klein stopped one morning with a bag of rolls from her shop. Ben Carter offered an old dog bed he had stored in his garage. The town did not ask many questions. It simply made room. On the morning the smaller dog finally ran, not far, only a few uneven steps across the yard, Rowan laughed out loud, the sound carrying across the hills. Coda barked once, sharp and bright, then bowed in front of his companion, as if saluting victory after a long campaign. The smaller dog tilted his head, confused but pleased, and wagged his tail for the first time. Rowan named him Asher that evening. Coda already had his name. Asher learned the shape of the house, the window where sunlight pooled in the afternoon, the corner near the stove that was always warm, the place by the door where Coda chose to sleep each night, his body positioned between Rowan and the dark. Spring settled fully into the valley. Snow vanished from the lower fields. The mountains softened from white to gray to green. And with every change, Rowan felt something inside himself shift as well. The nights no longer stretched so wide. The mornings no longer felt like a test. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, Rowan sat on the porch steps. Coda lay at his side. Asher rested with his head on Rowan's boot. The sky glowed in colors Rowan had not stopped to notice in years. When the wind lifted, Coda stood, walked a few steps toward the edge of the porch, and bowed, once, slow and steady, toward the open valley. Rowan did not ask why. Some gestures did not need explanation. Later that night, Rowan dreamed of snow melting into rivers, of Elena standing on the far bank, smiling, of two dogs running toward him across green fields. When he woke, the dream did not ache the way it once would have. It felt complete. The winter that had nearly broken them was gone. The family it created remained. Sometimes God does not send the miracle we expect. Sometimes he sends the miracle we need in the coldest night of winter when everything seemed lost. God used two small dogs to remind one broken man that life is still sacred, that love still walks this world quietly, that hope still chooses us when we are not looking. If you are walking through a hard season today, remember this. God is never late. He is always working, even when the road is silent, even when the snow is falling, even when you feel alone, like Rowan, like Coda, like Asher. We are all fighting something, and sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the biggest turning point of our lives. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what this story meant to you, and subscribe to the channel so more hearts can be reached. May God bless every person watching. May he protect your home, your family, and your future. If you believe in miracles, if you believe God is still working in this world, please type Amen in the comments.